Oops. Hi.
Hi, I'm so sorry.
Hi, this.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome. Can you? That's okay, because we're still setting up on this end too. So.
Okay, great.
Oh. So you guys can see the PowerPoint at this point? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And Shirley, you're good with what you've got?
Good luck. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. We'll come find you if we need you. Please do.
Okay. So when I'm done, I press the red button up top when we're all done for the day. Okay.
And then leave meeting.
And then.
So you're gonna hit.
Can you still hear us?
Yes, I can. Sorry, you were muted.
Oh, okay.
We're still,
Wait, did we lose
I'm still getting my crash course here on how this is going to go before I let Andrew leave the room. Okay. All right. Okay, I don't need this, right?
No.
Where are you?
Yeah.
Downstairs.
Okay. Oh, nice vote of confidence I get here. Andrew, where are you? Did you do, I have your cell number? Can I get your cell number? Yep. 1978. 1978. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Great. Good to call for an emergency. Oh my God, call him. All right. Alrighty. Oh, okay. So are you guys all set on your end?
I think so.
Right. All right. Awesome. Then I think, hey, we're doing pretty good. We're only like less than 10 minutes late starting, which is not bad. Not bad at all. I'm gonna grab this. Okay, can we, we see you guys, but in a very small corner and it's not well lit, so we can't see people too well. Would folks be able to kind of introduce themselves a little bit? Because I know we have a mixture of folks with us today from the COBE staff and from other research groups at Western Psych. So could we get some introductions? Do you guys want to start in Pittsburgh?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brianne Sylvester. I'm one of the interviewers on the COBE study. I also work on WAVE and the KSADS computer study. Mary Kay, unfortunately, I think you guys all got the email, though she's not here today.
Yep.
We'll go around and let you know.
Hi, I'm Beth Hafer, and I work on the WAVE study as the coordinator.
Hi, I'm Dawn Rice, and I work on COBE, WAVE, and KSADS computer study.
Hi, I'm Jessica Hamilton. I'm working with Tina Goldstein and Peter Franzen on the SPOT study, which we'll be using the A-Life. That's a new study that's just starting up.
Oh, great.
Hi, my name is Avi. I'm a scholar visitor from Spain.
Oh, welcome.
Thank
Great.
you.
Can I ask what the WAVE study is? I don't know if you guys know. What is WAVE?
So it's one of Dr. Goldstein's studies. It's with adolescents with bipolar disorder, and they're comparing, they get 1 year of treatment in the first year of the study. So they're either in DBT or standard of care, but we also use like the PSR and the psychosocial functioning, the med forms, all of that. We do follow-ups every 3 months the first year, then just twice the second year.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. I know that's always my, that's sort of the perk for me when I do these trainings is I get to see and hear what everybody else has got going on for research. So it's always good to know what's happening out there. Well, do you guys want to start with our introductions on our end?
Yeah, so my name is Cindy, and I'm an interviewer on the COBE study as well.
And I'm Heather Hauer. I'm the project director on the COBE study.
I'm Matt Killam. I'm also involved with the COBE study and a few others.
And I'm Claire Walker. Whoops, where'd you guys go? Oh, I see you. I see you here. I am going to be doing the training today. I used to work with the COBE study in terms of reliability. Was involved in the initial training and reliability.
And hi, I'm Shirley Yen. I'm calling in remotely as well. And I'm the ground site PI of COBE.
Where'd they go? They used to be up there, right? Okay, they're on. We're just talking because we can see you guys. I can see you on the laptop, but I can't see you on the big screen anymore. Something like you kind of disappeared. From
Shirley up there.
There.
Oh, because they weren't talking from them.
Oh,
Okay,
got it. Okay, we understand now. When you were speaking, their picture disappeared.
Oh, I'll try to be quiet. I'm going to mute myself.
No, don't be quiet. But I was just thinking, I have touched nothing. I did not touch any button. I'm like, I don't know how that just happened. Okay. It's just my little paranoia here as we walk through this. Well, let's get ourselves going, because what I wanted to do today, the purpose for everybody getting together was to actually to create a recording of this introductory training for the life and / A life. And so that is my cue to remind everybody that you are being recorded. And if that is something that's a concern to you, or if it just feels uncomfortable to, it's okay if either you choose to not say anything or you choose to not participate. But this training will be recorded so that we will have something that can be used at the various sites going forward, that's something that's more up to date and can be used at the site. So as you have turnover and different assessors and interviewers, you can have this to reference. I did not put out an agenda for the 2 days. I'm going with the story that I wanted to save paper, but actually I just didn't. So just to kind of give you a little heads up, what I want to do today is I want to give those of you that may be new to using either the Life or the A Life, we're going to kind of go through a little bit of the background, a little bit of the history, and we're going to talk about the assessment tool itself. We're going to walk through the process, primarily starting with the scoring system. And even though that might seem a little backwards, once you understand the scoring system, it helps to give you sort of a language that is helpful and serves as a guide for the interview itself. So we actually start with the scoring system, which we're going to spend most of our time on today. And we'll look at the various sections, the diagnostic section, the psychosocial functioning section. And we may get to the med grids today. We may hold that till tomorrow. We'll see. We're going to look at ways today in which protocol modifications can be implemented with the Life or the A Life. What are the sections of this assessment tool that lends itself to modification, and what are the areas that do not? We'll be using COBE protocol modifications as examples of those as we go through. So those of you who are working with COBE, please feel free to kind of jump in, let me know if it's like, ooh, yeah, that's not the most up-to-date protocol, or yeah, we changed our minds and we don't really do that one. So please feel free to kind of give your feedback. And then at the end of today, we actually will be working on a practice vignette. Now, all of you should have a packet of information in front of you. And it should include the COBE version of the A Life. It should include also a blank PSR grid template, as well as a blank version of the COBE PSR grid, psychiatric status rating grid, that shows a scannable version. You will have in your packet the COBE PSR scales. You'll have those printed out and in your packet. And you'll also have the vignette. And you will have a psychiatric status rating grid that goes along with the vignette. It actually has dates on it. Now, we're going to be talking about all of those pieces of this as we go through today, but those are the things that you'll want to have in front of you. Does that sound right to our Pittsburgh crew?
Yeah, I think so. What do you mean by a copy of the A-Life, though? The packet that walks you through the diagnostic criteria, each disorder. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that one. Not the whole packet with all the scoring forms. That's not really necessary for today. Does that sound right?
Like the PSR scales? Rating
No,
scales?
Like the whole interview form.
Yeah, so on the top, it's going to say COBE A-Life DSM-4 version, adolescent longitudinal interval follow-up evaluation.
I don't think we... I'm not sure if we had that in the email.
Can you email that to us?
Yeah, I'll email it again. I emailed it to Mary Kay, but
yeah, it came in a second
Yeah.
email because that's something I didn't have. I didn't put it in my original email, so it would have come from Heather.
Okay.
Yep.
so yeah, she might not have had a chance to forward it to you. I will send it to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's just good to have as a reference as we're talking.
Okay.
Okay. And then tomorrow, when we get together tomorrow afternoon, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the interview itself, the actual gathering of the information. So we're going to spend some time going over that, and then Cynthia has agreed to be my participant. So we actually will do a role play live during the afternoon tomorrow, and then we can spend some time kind of talking about how we may code it afterwards. But it'll be good to have one recorded and then be able to kind of look at what we want to do with that for scoring.
Sorry, so I just forwarded that to Rita. I don't know if I have anyone else's email, but Rita, can you get it? And
Yeah, we'll let her know. You mind? Thank you.
okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay. And just so you know, as I said, this is being recorded. Also know, as we go through the afternoon, the one thing that's a little difficult when we're doing trainings this style, when we're doing them this like kind of video training, to have an official break or anything like that is a little hard because then it just keeps running with nobody in the room. So please feel free to get up. If you have to leave the room, no problem. We promise we won't volunteer you for anything while you're out. So just, do what you need to do. I know folks here have been trying to figure out parking situations and the joys of timed parking. Okay. Okay, so we'll kind of get ourselves started. For those that haven't used the LIFE or the A-Life before, you're going to hear me use those terms interchangeably. The LIFE is the longitudinal interval follow-up evaluation. It was the first of the tools designed it was designed in the late 1970s. The A-Life came after that, and it's the adolescent version. The A stands for adolescent. It's the adolescent version of the LIFE. And so I kind of use them interchangeably because the standard, the rules, the PSRs, they're the same no matter which assessment you're using. The difference is certainly is that the A-Life will contain disorders that are specific for children or adolescents. It will also have its phrasing a little more user-friendly for the younger age groups. And when we get to the psychosocial section, we can look at some of the differences there. But again, the scoring systems all the way through are standard. So we're going to kind of combine them both in this particular presentation. But again, for those who haven't used it, the LIFE was actually designed in the late 1970s, and it was designed as a part of the collaborative depression study. And at that point in time, there's a lot of what came out of the collaborative depression study were assessments to sort of standardize research. And as a part of that came the desire to be able to look at the course of disorders and to be able to follow symptoms through time. And up until that point, the assessment tools really looked at criteria at point A, point B, but you really didn't know what was happening in between. And so the life was designed so that you could assess point A and point B and everything that's happening in between. So you can actually begin to follow the course. It was designed to be a follow-up assessment tool. It is not a baseline assessment. And let me just kind of go back to say when this was designed as a part of a collaborative depression study, the life assessment tool was designed by Dr. Martin Keller and the late Dr. Robert Shapiro. And so the life assessment has always been something that when studies are looking to use it, they usually request permission from Dr. Keller to use it. And so again, the life is designed for longitudinal. It is not a baseline assessment tool. It's, most of you are familiar with either doing the KSADS or the SKID at baseline. You're doing a lifetime history. The life does not lend itself to that. You can't follow course through lifetime. That would be too much. With that said, I will put out there that some studies do choose to incorporate the life as part of their baseline assessments. And what they'll do is take usually whatever disorders are the primary focus for the study, and they'll look at the course. They'll identify a period of time, maybe a month, maybe 6 months prior to intake, and they'll do a life assessment just for those particular disorders, but in a very defined period of time. So again, not for a lifetime assessment. The difference also between something like the life and the SKID or the A-life and the KSADS is that the life is semi-structured. And as we walk through this today and we take a look at the manual, when you guys have copies of that in front of you, you're going to see that there are questions for each disorder. There's 1 or 2 questions on the page, and they're really just meant to be there as a guide. They're not verbatim questions. They're just there as a guideline for you. Again, the point of doing this assessment is you're looking to gather course information. And so this has to have some flexibility because that course is going to be different for everyone. This isn't like saying where we're going to have a couple of questions that they have to answer yes to, or we go no further. We want to know the presence of any and all level of symptoms. So we have to keep this open and ask questions in a way that allows participants to describe. They need to begin to describe what they're experiencing. So then you can get a sense of whether or not they're meeting criteria for a particular disorder. So open-ended questions become part of the conversation, become part of the interview as well. So again, the life is not the SKID, but the diagnostic criteria that we use is the same. It's the DSM criteria. For today, we're going to be using DSM-4. So I apologize for those of you that are knee-deep in 5. But we're going to be using DSM-4 when we look at examples of our scales. The DSM-5 life is underway. So it will be available at some point, although I'm looking at my Brown colleagues here and I'm like, I don't know when, but soon. So the life, as I said, is semi-structured. It's not unstructured. And that's the other point you want to keep in mind. There really are boundaries. So it's sort of like you have like this circle and you get to sort of move about in the circle, but there are boundaries around that of how far you can move. If you go outside of those boundaries, you're not going to have what you need. You're not going to have the time frame that you're looking for. You're not going to have a sense of how the symptoms are clustering together or not clustering together. So you really want to respect the fact that it is semi-structured and you want to be clear on what your guidelines are as the assessor as you go into this type of assessment. It's different from other assessments. So there are definitely definitely do's and don'ts, and that's what we're going to go over today. And as a result of that, oops, it's my little, it's not wanting me to go. Nope. Let's see, I want to start moving us forward.
Next on
Yeah, I was supposed to be able to do my arrow here. There we go. Now we're working. So, well, it's not as nice now that I had to have that delay in between. So this is my slide to remind you that we have guidelines that you get to fill in, but we try not to mess it up. So that's the goal of the day. All right, so psychiatric status rating. This is the scoring system for the life. Okay, this is when you always hear the term PSR. This is where it comes from, psychiatric status rating. Again, as I said, today we're going to focus on DSM-4. And the psychiatric status rating is just what it says there in the first bullet. It is the numeric value that indicates the level of severity for a particular DSM-4 diagnosis. So each diagnosis that a particular study has chosen to follow has a corresponding psychiatric status rating scale that goes with it. The number on those scales, they're either 6-point scales or 3-point scales, and we're going to look at the difference between them. We're going to look at what a template is for a 6-point scale, what a template is for a 3-point, and we're going to look at some of the scales that were designed specifically for particular disorders. But that's when we talk about the numbers. So it's either a 0 through 6 or a 0 through 3 for those scales. Those numbers are assigned on a week-to-week basis. And in your packet, you have a blank PSR grid. Just sort of a standard where each, it has the shading for each line. This is sort of a standard, generic kind of PSR scale that covers a 6-month period of time. It's 26 weeks. And you see that each block is numbered, week 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 26. So there will be a score that's given in each one of those weeks. And what I want to say to you is to not panic at this point, because as much as we score this on a week-to-week basis, the assessment itself, the discussion does not take place, does not require you to discuss each and every week of the follow-up period. And so we're gonna talk about how that works. The purpose of this, as these numbers are placed on this grid, that is the information that then becomes your data. That's what gets input into the system. It's that information that will allow you and start to paint that picture of what the course is like as you're moving, as a participant is moving from perhaps full criteria down to partial remission, perhaps episodes are onsetting or offsetting. You're tracking subthreshold symptoms in between. The numbers that you have on that grid are actually telling that story. And it allows, as these are entered into the system during analysis, it allows researchers to begin to look at the fluctuation in symptoms over time, to analyze time to recovery or relapse, perhaps look at predictors, of course. All of that information is able to come from the numbers that you're putting on this grid. As I said, here is an example. This is what you have in front of you, an example of a PSR grid. This one only has 13 weeks, but you see always on the left, the diagnostic symptoms are listed in the left column, and then across the top, the weeks are numbered across the top. On the version that you have in your packet, and just for the sake that it didn't fit onto the slide, each week has a date above it. And that date occurs in real time, okay? The date represents the first day of that week. So whatever you have for the date that will be above week 1 is the first day of week 1, the first day of week 2, and so on. The dates can be put onto a grid electronically if you have a program where you are that is going to allow you to do that, or they can be hand dated by the assessor. They all are based on baseline, the data baseline. So once we know if their data baseline is Monday, June 3rd, then the first day of week 1, if you're doing this electronically, will be Tuesday, June 4th. And then every other week begins on a Tuesday. Week 2 starts on a Tuesday, week 3 starts on a Tuesday, week 4, you're always tracking from Tuesday to Tuesday. Okay, so do you have a question?
I know in Kobe, I think we use the actual date of the baseline, but otherwise, yeah, everything's the same how you explained it.
Okay, so that you actually, do you guys hand date them, Kobe?
We do it electronically.
Yeah, Matt created.
Okay,
program.
but at the beginning it was hand dated, correct? That's why when you hand date them, you can actually use the day of baseline as your first day of week 1.
Okay.
When it's done electronically, the computer won't allow you to do that. And that's why it shows as starting the next day. You can't use the same date twice. So either way, as long as you're consistent. So if you're hand dating, you would use the data baseline. You can use that as the day 1, which is great. But just know whatever day of the week that is, that's the day of the week all the other weeks start on.
Yeah.
And this comes into play when you have done your interview and you're going back and you're coding this and you're looking at change points. You're taking their information and you're translating this into real time. You need to know when things changed. So you need to know what period of time is covered from week 5 to week 9 versus what period of time is covered in week 10. So the dates will be on the grid. And just also so you know, this coding is done, for those of you that haven't used this yet, the coding of the grid is done after the interview. You are not filling these in during the interview, okay? And we're gonna talk a little bit about how you take your notes during an interview so that you have what you need to be able to go back to your desk and fill in this grid. Okay, so I had mentioned that we have sort of 2 types of scales that are used for PSR scales. There's the 6-point scale and there's the 3-point scale. You know, as we go on this afternoon, we're going to be looking at how some of the protocol modifications that can be made, and we'll be, again, looking at Kobe specifically. But I can't say this enough, that the study protocol determines which disorders are going to be followed, which disorders you're going to see in that packet that you guys just received, the order in which the diagnoses occur, and whether or not the particular diagnoses are going to be followed on a 6-point scale or a 3-point scale. All of those decisions get made before you start. Before you start doing any of your assessments, that information needs to be determined. When you're looking at the longitudinal research, if there is a 6-point scale that's available for a particular disorder, it's helpful to go ahead and use it because over time, sometimes things may change through the years. So maybe you're 5 years into your study and you realize, you know, we're really not interested in following social phobia other than to know it's there or it's not there. And so we're not looking for the level of detail that a 6-point scale may afford to us. So in order to save some time in coding, we're going to condense this down to a 3-point scale. Well, you can go from a 6-point scale to a 3-point scale. You can look at all your earlier data and condense those 6 points down to a 3-point scale, and so that you have consistency through the years from your past data to going forward. However, if you start on a 3-point scale and then decide down the road, oh, we want this on a 6-point scale, you're not going to be able to expand that out. You're not going to be able to take a 3-point scale and expand it out to the level of detail. So just something to consider at the beginning when you're starting your study. If you can go ahead and use that 6-point scale if it's available. If you have any inkling that you may want to see some of the detail of any of the particular disorders that a 6-point scale will afford to you, because it's hard to change your mind on that down the road. This is a example of sort of a template, a generic kind of 6-point scale. So with this type of scale, you've got a 5 and a 6 are your full criteria codes. So when someone meets full criteria for a particular disorder, you're going to give them a 5 or you're going to give them a 6. For most disorders, and you'll see that this when we look at the particular scales, for most disorders, a 6 means extreme impairment in functioning. So they meet full criteria, but they have extreme impairment in functioning. Other than major depression and mania, which also allow for the presence of psychotic symptoms. And again, we're going to be looking at those scales in particular, so you're going to see how that gets documented. Your 4 and your 3 are your partial remission coding. So you really, when you look at these scales, you want to read them from the top down. So as you're coming out of full criteria, your PSR4 is a good representation for a cluster of symptoms that sort of just miss being full criteria. So perhaps you are missing one symptom off the symptom count. So maybe you need 5 symptoms and you've only got 4. Or perhaps you've got 5 symptoms, but the persistence doesn't match what's required for full criteria. So there's something about it that's just off. That's your PSR4. Your PSR3 are your people that are like middle of the road. The symptoms that they are experiencing are noticeable. You see them, they know that this is happening. It's very notable to them. In a PSR3, you might have impairment and distress, you might not. It's not required for a 3. It will, so a PSR3 for one person is going to look a little different from a PSR3 for another person, because you sort of are this halfway point, but it's notable. It's notable to you. The symptoms are still significant, and it keeps them in partial remission. The PSR2 and the PSR1, both of those in analysis will begin to offset an episode. So a PSR2 is reserved for just residual symptoms. And we really mean residual symptoms. You shouldn't see impairment or distress with a 2. It shouldn't be anything that's bothersome to the individual. An example may be that this is someone who had experienced a major depressive episode, and at the point at which you want to give a PSR2, perhaps they're saying at that point there's no depressed mood any longer, no loss of interest, but they still notice a night or 2 a week they have a little trouble falling asleep. There's still something from that original cluster that hasn't quite cleared. So usually for a 2 means you've got a pretty good reporter. You got somebody who got pretty good insight. But it's just a residual symptom, and it allows you to distinguish that person from someone who's saying symptom-free. Everything has cleared. And that's your PSR1. Everything has cleared. There are no symptoms present. Okay? We have, in terms of the standard, we're going to look at, we have a couple of standard rules, and these are areas in which protocol modification can be made. So for instance, a standard rule when using the life is that when you're going to begin coding PSRs on a line. Okay, so we just looked at the grid. You have this line that says major depression. You have, however many boxes, 26 boxes that follow it. When you begin to code on that line means that the person has met full criteria for that particular disorder. That is the standard rule of when do I start to put symptoms that I think look like major depression, or I think these symptoms look like generalized anxiety disorder. Well, when they hit full criteria, you can start to represent them on that line if they've never had anything on that line before. Okay, so the first time. Again, we're going to talk about ways in which protocol modifications can make adjustments to that. but that's sort of the standard. So your 5, your 6, your 4, your 3, on a 6-point scale, those all keep a person in episode. When analysis is being done, they're still seen as being in episode. The episode will end, they considered out of episode when they've had 8 weeks or more at a PSR2 or a 1 or a combination of those when you're using a 6-point scale. Once in analysis, we read 8 weeks or more, it's going to say, okay, the episode is done. So again, these pieces you're going to see as we talk about modifications and the use of the interest in tracking subthreshold symptoms, all of that will lend itself, especially that first one sort of lends itself to protocol modification, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just want you to understand, like, these are some of the standard rules. The number 4 is a really good guideline to consider, particularly in longitudinal studies, and particularly when you're interested in tracking subthreshold symptoms. Because if you're interested in tracking subthreshold symptoms, you're basically saying, okay, we are going to allow, subthreshold symptoms. Let's say somebody ended an episode. Now I've got PSR1s, and they've been like that. They've been PSR1s for 18 months. They haven't had a symptom of this in a long time. And like, let's say GAD, they haven't had a symptom of GAD in 18 months. And then some subthreshold symptoms start to occur. The guideline of number 4 is going to ask you to sort of pause a minute. So before you drop those automatically back onto that GAD line, because it's been a year or more, give it some consideration. Is this presentation of symptoms actually better accounted for by something else? You are not always locked into whatever the major disorder line was, whatever that Axis 1 line was that they were originally followed by. Once you hit that 1-year mark of symptom-free, it really is saying, hey, give some thought to whether or not these subthreshold symptoms may actually be better represented by another disorder, maybe prodromal symptoms for something else. It allows you to sort of give that consideration. Anyway, it's sort of just that reminder. That's what the guideline 4 is about, saying just take a minute and give it some thought. You're not locked in at this point. There's your template for a 3-point scale. This is why I was saying you can always condense your 6-point scale down to a 3. So your PSR 3 represents full criteria for a disorder. So if you're looking at the 2 scales together, a 5 and a 6 on a 6-point scale equal your 3. Any and all of it. Once they hit full criteria, it's all in a PSR 3. A PSR 2 represents the partial remission. They've dropped out of full criteria, and now we're following them at a PSR 2 for any level. So they're 1 symptom short, 2, they have 1 symptom left. So on a 6-point scale, that's your 4, your 3, and your 2. All get clustered into a PSR 2. What we know is that, so for instance, again, if you were following GAD on a 3-point scale, you'd have full criteria, or anything less than that is a 2. As soon as you know you're not full criteria, but they've got symptoms left, you're a 2. Your PSR 1 holds the same meaning, no symptoms. There are no symptoms left. Okay? Same set of guidelines to be watching for. Other than the fact that, again, to offset an episode in analysis, they'll look at 8 weeks or more just at a PSR 1. Again, one of the disorders, 2 of the disorders, the abuse and dependence criteria would be an exception to this. If you see note number 2, we follow those on 3-point scales, but in order to, in analysis to offset an episode in DSM-4, 12 months symptom-free is required. That's really built into the criteria set. So in analysis, you'd be watching for that PSR 1 to run for a year or more. I want to just I'm going to put this up as an example. So this is our major depression criteria, right, for DSM-4. And as we've been talking about these PSR scales, I keep saying, oh, that we have scales that are developed specifically for the disorders. And you're going to see using the PSRs really requires you, when you're doing these assessments, to pay attention to the detail for the particular disorder that you're following. Pay attention to your criteria. And I use this as an example because, you know, we all know the criteria set for major depression, right? You know, you don't need anything in front of you to run through that full list. So again, there's detail built into these criteria most of the day, nearly every day. Some of these criteria are have phrasing such as and or, fatigue or loss of energy, insomnia or hypersomnia. You know, in terms of thoughts of death or suicidal ideation, recurrent. These are all terms that become very important as you're walking through your assessment, because when we're asking someone, you know, if they're experiencing a down or a depressed mood, you know, they're saying, yeah, you know, by the beginning of May, I definitely started to feel really depressed. We follow with questions such as, when that down mood was around, how many days of the week were you experiencing that down mood? And on those days, how much of the day? Because you really are having to focus on not just the presence or absence of the symptom. You want to know the persistence. Does it fully meet that criteria or does it not? Because again, we need to know if they're going to hit full criteria, we need to know it meets you know, it meets the number of criteria, it meets the persistence of the criteria. We need to know that we've assessed for impairment and marked distress. You know, for each time block, you run through the whole list of questions. So we just don't want to know, oh yeah, they had a down mood, they were having some trouble sleeping, their appetite was a little low, and some trouble concentrating. Okay, how often? You know, in order for us to assign a PSR, that is key information. So when we start to look at these scales that are designed for the particular disorders, it really incorporates a level of detail that is necessary for us to use when we're doing our assessments. This is the criteria for, this is the PSR scale for major depression. Okay, very straightforward. As you can see, your PSR-5 and your PSR-6 both refer to meeting definite DSM-4 criteria. They both meet full criteria. However, your PSR-6 is distinguished because there's either presence of prominent psychotic symptoms or the mood symptoms cause extreme impairment in functioning. I am going to say this about when you're coding a PSR-6. We don't use those lightly. We really don't. And in your study, you want to make sure that you have some reliability between your raters, some consensus on what is considered extreme impairment in functioning. You know, those of us here at Brown, we're always, you know, we've sort of been raised with the understanding of extreme impairment in functioning is they're having trouble, like for depression, they're having trouble getting out of bed. They're having trouble getting themselves something to eat. Extreme impairment in functioning is not necessarily missing work. You might miss work, but how are you doing at home? You know, yeah, I didn't even go to work. So what were you, the days you didn't go to work, what were your days like? What were you doing? Like, you know, there may be days I decide I'm not well enough to go to work, but I suddenly am well enough to have a really nice beach walk, or I'm very well to maybe just get a few errands done. You know what I mean? So listen for the detail. If you're looking at a 6, it's extreme impairment in functioning.
I know that we often kind of think of like hospitalization as an example of extreme impairment.
Yeah. And even with that, when you're at a hospitalization, you're asking them, you're really getting a sense of what all was going on that resulted. Because every once in a while, there's somebody who's able to, depending on sort of their coverage or kind of where they're living in the United States or their insurance coverage, a hospitalization may not always relate. So when I always do the training, I don't make it black and white, but that's where your study consensus comes in to say, this is, that's your cue of listen for that PSR 6. But it's not something that you would see that many of. Your 5s are sort of a wider category, and your 6 is that thin layer across the top. In the mood disorders for major depression and mania, again, it also includes prominent psychotic symptoms. If prominent psychotic symptoms are happening along with full criteria, either mania or major depression, that may warrant assigning a PSR 6 in particular weeks. And we're going to look at the hallucination and delusion lines on the PSR grids and how those two relate to each other. For instance, if you have a PSR 6 in week 2 on major depression, and you're putting it there because during that week they were experiencing auditory hallucinations, on the PSR grid, you probably have a hallucinations line. In week 2, I'm going to see something coded. And that's actually gives me, and anyone looking at the grid, or when the grid goes in for analysis, it sort of explains that 6 a little bit. Your PSR 4, just like we talked about in the generic, is that they don't meet full criteria, but they have major symptoms or impairment from the disorder. So the example they give is a depressive episode with only 4 associated symptoms, but still has impairment. So you sort of have just missed. Your PSR 3 is considerably less psychopathology, but again, you have obvious as evidence of the disorder. Again, you may have impairment, you may not. You may have distress, you may not. That varies a bit from individual to individual in terms of their own particular tolerance, as well, and their own history and experience with their symptoms. And then we go down to your PSR 4, your PSR 2, and your PSR 1. You're going to notice here the PSR 0. And the PSR 0 is on every scale. Whether you're using a 3-point or a 6-point scale, you have a 0. There's only one use for a PSR 0. And this is, I kind of use the term like a placeholder, okay? So you're going to have disorders that the study is saying, okay, I don't want to see anything on this line until they hit full criteria. So maybe, trying to think of what we can use. An example of that might be PTSD, okay? They have no history of trauma. They have no history of PTSD. They come into your study and they're 2 years in, they experience a traumatic event. So you have not, in the first year, you've not coded anything on that PTSD line. They have no history of it. There's no symptoms. And then we get to a point at which there's a traumatic event and they begin to experience symptoms of PTSD and they hit full criteria. So let's say they're in week 16 of the year 2 grid and you want to start PSR 5 for PTSD. And you start that 5 and you begin to code depending on however they're presenting the symptoms. Whatever PSR follows that is the PSR that best represents the symptoms that they describe to you. However, you have weeks 1 through 15 on this grid. And what you don't want to do is hand that to your data entry folks and say, here you go. Because they're going to be like, what? You have to put something in weeks 1 through 15. You don't want to have it blank. Because again, when it goes to data entry, they don't know, did you forget to just put something? Or, to have sort of a half line coded is not okay. So the PSR 0 is used to fill in from weeks 1 through 15 in that example. You would have zeros. And then here comes your PSR 5. And when you see that, that tells you, when you have zeros, that tells you this person has never had an episode of PTSD before in either the life of the study or their lifetime, depending on your protocol. But we have never followed them for this. Here's my full criteria onset, and now I'm going to follow symptoms going forward. So that PSR 0 sort of fills in those lines, and that's what it tells you. as you're moving forward and you've started to code and these symptoms are there for however long they're experiencing symptoms of PTSD, perhaps it's another 18 months and they're down to a PSR2 and then down to a PSR1. Because 1 also means symptom-free. But you're looking at that PSR1. When you see PSR1s on the grid, it means they're symptom-free, but I have followed, this person has been followed in our study for symptoms on this line. So a 0 tells you there's no symptoms and never have been. And then when they become symptom-free again on that line, you use the 1, PSR1. Means symptom-free, but at some point we were coding something on this line. They tell 2 different stories. So once you start to code on a line, you never go back to using a 0. That's it. That's the only time, those are the only situations they're going to be used in. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. I know for those of you that are using it, this is like excruciating detail. But for those of you who aren't using it, you got to kind of hear the story. Okay. Hypomania. Welcome to COBE. I'm going to tell you, so the hypomania scale has a 6-point scale, and it has a 6-point scale because COBE designed it. Prior to the COBE study, we did, and no one was using a 6-point scale for hypomania. It was always on a 3-point scale. And so this is another example of a scale that was designed specifically for the criteria of hypomania. Now for COBE, the driving force behind expanding this out to a 6-point scale was that COBE bipolar NOS was also an inclusion criteria. So there needed to be a distinction between hypomania and bipolar NOS and where those lines would be. And that was the driving force behind developing a 6-point scale for hypomania that could incorporate your BP-NOS. And now everybody uses it. Now everybody uses it. I was actually doing a training for a study where somebody was asking, because they did not have weren't using the 6-point scale, and somebody was like, well, I know the COBE study, and they have a lot of detail, and it talks about, it talks about functioning and intensity, and it's like, whoa. So it is definitely used, and it is designed specifically for the hypomania and the NOS level of symptoms. And as you see, as you go down through the scale, it gives you a very clear description of what would meet specifically for a PSR4. And, so it gives examples of a PSR4 means you're no longer meeting for hypomania, but perhaps you're at a level that it would meet for the BP-NOS. You're looking at different examples. When you look at what's in parentheses, it gives you a couple of different examples of what may qualify using the hypomania criteria. Same in your PSR3. You've got examples in there, and you'll notice it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be, pay attention to the ORs. If you're in a study that wants to use the 6-point hypomania scale, this is information that you want to be gathering when you're doing your assessment. You want to get a sense of what is the, what are the criteria that they're endorsing? What is the duration of the symptoms of what is going on for impairment? You've got examples. If there's impairment in functioning, you've got examples of what those may be. So you can make the determination. Are we looking at moderate? Am I looking at mild? That's for you to decide, not your participant.
Just a second, Claire.
Yep.
So Sydney filled out an example PSR grid with zeros as placeholders on the PTSD line until the onset of PSR5.
I just figured if you've never actually seen it,
Yep.
Yeah.
it just makes, I thought it.
So that works.
I'm a very visual person, and I figured
That
it would
works.
be.
Yeah. So Sydney
For
emailed
someone
that
who's
to
never
me,
done it.
and I just forwarded that to Rita. So Rita should have that, and you guys can print it out as an example.
Thanks.
Are you guys good? Does anybody have questions in terms of what we've been talking about in terms of the specific scales so far?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. All right. This is the this is what follows the scale that's used in COBE, where it gives sort of a breakdown. Where it gives you a breakdown of duration and gives you a breakdown of intensity. Oh, I apologize for that being a little off. The bottom part is like, I can't tell you, every time I've opened up this PowerPoint, I've had to fix that. And now I'm like, and now I can't fix it. I don't know why it keeps changing itself, but it does. Here is the PTSD scale, the 6-point scale. As you can see, it's designed specifically for PTSD. As you know, when you're assessing for PTSD, you're going through the various clusters. And, you know, this gives you, again, your 5 and your 6 of full criteria, with your 6 being with extreme impairment in functioning. A PSR4 is they meet 2 of the 3 clusters. They meet enough criteria in 2 of the 3 clusters. And they have significant distress or impairment. PSR3, they meet only 1 of the 3. Now, they may have symptoms in the other 2, but not enough to fully meet for the cluster. And if they have impairment or distress, it's no more than moderate. They can have moderate or mild. When we get down to a PSR2, they're not meeting, they have symptoms, but there's not enough symptoms to meet for any of the clusters. And they're allowed to have the, they may have the symptoms, but no more than a mild degree, and no impairment or distress as a result. And again, your 1 is no symptoms, and your 0 has the same meaning as always. So again, this just gives you an example of when we talk about scales being designed specifically for particular disorders. This is an example. This is your social phobia scale, again, designed based on the specific criteria, so that when we come out of full criteria, when we say PSR4 is you're just missing full criteria, in social phobia, it's really clear which criteria you're missing. You meet for them all except for criterion E, which is interference or mock distress. If that's the only thing that's missing from the participant's presentation of symptoms, they meet for a PSR4. A PSR3, they fail more than 1, but less than all of the criteria. So they're meeting, they fail 2 or more of the criteria. And so on down the scale. But again, it gives you an idea of when we say these scales are written for specific disorders, they really pay very close attention to the detail. For those of you that haven't done this before, we do have scales that we use for panic disorder. And I'm going to show you a couple of scales that have a few exceptions. Panic disorder is 1. So the panic disorder scale is it's actually very straightforward. You're looking at the level of the attack, whether it's a full criteria or limited symptom attack, and it requires you then to assess that and to assess the frequency of the attacks. The panic disorder scale does not address full criteria partial remission of panic disorder. The assumption is if you're using this scale that they've met full criteria for the disorder. And then what we're asking folks to do for studies that are using this scale, they want to track the frequency, the intensity and frequency of the attacks themselves. For studies that are tracking for agoraphobia, we have the agoraphobia scales that are lined up. Again, against the DSM-4 diagnostic criteria. And you'll see that the asterisk is against the 4, 5, and the 6. On this scale, again, we're back to looking at episodes. We're tracking whether they meet full criteria for agoraphobia or not, full criteria or partial remission. And in this case, a 4, 5, and a 6 warrant full criteria. because the DSM just notes avoidance. And so what we've done on the scale is we've kind of broken the avoidance into levels. So avoidance some of the time is enough to hit full criteria, either avoidance some of the time or endurance with marked distress or anxiety some of the time, or needing a companion some of the time. And then we go up to a 5, which is avoidance most of the time or marked distress most of the time. And then the 6 is reserved for those that are housebound as a result of these symptoms. So in this situation, it's really just your PSR3 begins to put you in that partial remission where there's anxiety but no avoidance. So again, the scales are designed for the particular diagnostic criteria. We had mentioned this a little while ago. We had talked about the fact that there are, usually studies will have a line for delusions and hallucinations on their grids. These are also followed with a 3-point scale. It's not specifically like the regular 3-point PSR scale, because it's not like we're looking at episodes. It's really looking at a definite symptom, probable level, or symptom-free. So as you're assessing what you're considering to be either hallucination or delusion, you're asking enough questions to know whether they would meet probable or a definite level for that experience. And this is what I was talking about. If you see on the example, we've got major depression coded as 6s in weeks 4, 5, and 6. And you'll note you've got, under hallucinations, you have a definite level in week 5. And there is probable level of delusion in weeks 4, 5, and 6. So when you see that, it sort of explains, oh, that's why we have our 6s, because there's prominent psychotic symptoms during the same period of time. So you would actually pull those psychotic symptoms out and be able to represent them appropriately on the PSR lines. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. For those, again, that haven't used the PSR grid before, you'll see this sometimes at the bottom. This is an optional line at the end of the grid. Some studies will put it on, some studies won't. And it's the OPD line, other psychiatric disorder. It gives you a place to track a disorder that perhaps wasn't noted in your manual. As we said, the study decides what disorders are going to show up in the life manual and in what order. So there may be something that's not a particular focus of the study, but something that someone is experiencing. It's obvious to you in the interview. You didn't have to go looking for it, but it's sitting right there. And you want to represent this on the grid. These are the lines in which you would do it. So they're usually at the very bottom of the grid. In other psychiatric disorder, you are only going to use a 3-point scale. It's either full criteria or it's partial remission or they're symptom-free. There is a space at the bottom of the grid where you are going to be required to write in your DSM code, and you're going to be required to write the name of the disorder that you're following. And this, I want to say, some studies will give you more than one line. You might have 2 lines where you can put another psychiatric disorder. This is what I'm going to say to you. If you're following something on the second to the last line of particular disorder, and it becomes symptom-free, and maybe a year down the road, another disorder pops up that you're not following in the life and you want to use the OPD line, use the next line. Don't reuse an OPD line for more than one disorder. It's because in analysis, it's just weird. It's going to screw things up, basically. It's just going to mess it up. And that's why you'll see if a study gives you 2 options, there's going to be 2 places to write your DSM code and the name of the disorder. And just keep it clean. Don't complicate things. These are not disorders that you're going to have a lot of people being followed for, which is why they're not in the life that was put together in the first place. So just keep it as clean as possible and as uncomplicated as possible. That you'll find studies that don't give you a line. They're like, look, if it's not on that list, you got to leave it alone. Got to leave it alone. And that's the study's decision. The other thing that you'll see at the bottom of a PSR grid is reliability. And usually it's one rating for the entire follow-up period of time. And this is really where you get to give your opinion of how reliable is this coding. So if this was somebody who was really struggling, they were very tired, they were really struggling with their recall, they were having memory issues, things that sort of impacted the interview, you can lower the reliability. That you may want to reflect it as fair reliability. Perhaps the person was resistant from beginning to end and you're like, I don't know, it's as good as we're going to get. But it really just gives you that space to say, we're going to, this isn't as clear of a report as what other participants have been able to give. So that's, again, it's just sort of one score that the rater is able to choose. Okay, so how is everybody doing so far? All right, because that's sort of a rundown of the kind of the generic standards of using the life. What I want to do at this point, I want to go into looking at the areas where protocol decisions can be made and what those look like in COBE. For those that are using the life, this has all made sense in terms of the life, the A-life?
Yes.
Okay, because I know, and it makes sense in terms of, I know the WAVE study that you're using some of the PSRs. Is this all sounding familiar?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, because now's a really good time to say if it doesn't. Now's a really good time to say it. Because sometimes it's, it's easy to drift, or it's easy to, I think sometimes what happens is as studies get started and they may be modeling off of another study within an organization, an institution that's using the life, and sometimes protocol decisions get made in one study, then another study comes along and they see that as the way to do it. And so, and somebody's protocol decisions get morphed into what the standard is for the life. And so it's good every now and then to sort of touch base back to what's the standard and then where are the protocol decisions that are made from that point. So it's really okay if some of this is saying, wow, I had no idea you're supposed to do it that way. Because sometimes it gets lost in protocol decisions that get handed down over time. A little institutional drift that can happen. All right, well, let's look at some of the areas in which using the life protocol decisions can be made. Some of these we've talked about. We've talked about before a study starts, the decision is made, what disorders are you going to follow? So you'll pull up, you have in front of you, you got handed today the packet that I always use the term, that's the life manual, right? You have the A-Life manual in front of you. So when you open it up, there are diagnostic criteria on the left-hand side of the page, a lot of blank space on the right-hand side of the page with a guide question that's written on the top. So from study to study, this packet's going to look a little different because I've worked on studies where you open it up and there are 2 disorders. Or there's 1 disorder, that is only 1 disorder that this study has an interest in tracking course. So this will be as thin or as thick as the study determines. I definitely have been in studies where it's really thick. They're tracking course of everything. So, you know, from study to study, it's going to look a little different. And the study decides, again, before you start, what are the disorders that are going to be followed and the order in which they're going to appear in the life manual. You're on a mood disorder study, your mood disorders are going to come first. You're on an anxiety disorder study, that's what's going to be on the first page. You're going to start with some of your anxiety disorders. That's what the protocol gets to make that decision. The order in which the diagnoses appear in the life manual matches the order in which they appear on the PSR grid. You make a match. And that's just so, again, it just avoids that clerical error. You don't want to be flipping pages. As you're going back through your notes through the manual, you want to be just moving down that left side of the PSR grid and what diagnosis am I working on? Line them up, make a match. The length of time of your PSR interval is also determined by the study. You know, for this, we always use, when I do a training, I always use like a 6-month grid. Kobe uses 6-month interval dates. So your PSR intervals are in 6-month blocks of time. The life has been, the reliability of the life is for a year. A lot of adult studies will do annual interviews over however many years. Again, the CDS study ran over 20. HARP ran, gosh, close to 15, I think, right? Annual interviews, again, with a child or adolescent study, the shorter the better. You know, a 6-month is a good block of time. There have been studies that have used, where they're using the life and then interviewing people monthly or every 3 months. My own personal opinion, the shorter the interval, the harder actually this becomes. But I think that's just my own bias on this. But the decision is made per the protocol of the study prior to the start. The study is also deciding 6-point or 3-point scales prior to the start of the study. Okay, what scales are you going to use? If a 6-point scale is available, you know, you may want to consider using the 6-point to start yourself off with. You know, as we mentioned before, can't say it too many times. You know, if you can start with the 6, go ahead, because you can always reduce it to a 3-point later. You just can't go backwards. So let's look at, these are some of the disorders that for the Kobe study that are being followed on 3-point scales. You have your anxiety disorder NOS. Anytime in a study, any NOS, whether it's mood disorders NOS, depression NOS, anxiety NOS, a 3-point scale is primarily what you'll see used. In Kobe's separation anxiety disorder, ADHD is a 3-point scale. I'm getting nods over here, so we're still good. ODD, conduct, all 3-point scales. Alcohol and substance use. So whether it's abuse or dependence for DSM-4, we're on a 3-point scale. And these are also pretty standard. I think I only know of one study, I think, that's looked at a 6-point scale for separation anxiety disorder. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't 6-point scales developed that are out there, because we don't have always the best track record for getting people to share back information. But, you know, it is what it is. Enuresis, and again, other psychiatric disorders, whenever you're using an OPD line, it's a 3-point scale. Okay, so those all make sense. And again, this is what, you know, the studies each make their decisions based on. Delusions, hallucinations, as we talked about, they're a 3-point scale as well, not necessarily about full criteria episodes, but a definite level and probable level of symptoms. Okay. Kobe protocol. This is where it gets a little wordy. This, in terms of opening the PSR line, and that's a phrase that I always use. Opening means you're beginning to assign a number next to a particular disorder. on the PSR grid. This is where study decisions, study protocol it gets to be considered here. And a lot of this is determined by what is the study's interest in subthreshold symptoms. That's something that gets taken into consideration when you're choosing your 6 versus your 3-point scale, because your 6-point scale is going to give you a lot more detail. And it has to do with when can I, as the interviewer, when can I start writing a number on that line? So you want to be clear. A study wants to try to be as clear as possible before it begins, or at least in those first 6 months of making changes. So for Kobe, for all diagnoses, except for depression and hypomania, so we're going to hold those aside for a minute. All the other disorders that are on the grid, the participant has to have met full criteria DSM-4 per DSM-4 standards at some point during his or her lifetime. So when you did your baseline assessment, a determination was made at that point that they, at some point in their life, had met for this particular disorder. They may have been symptom-free at intake. They may not have been, but you know for sure that at some point they met for that disorder. When that is the case, you are able to put you are able to choose a PSR score to go on that line that accurately reflects the symptoms they're describing to you during your current interview. So for example, if a patient had met full criteria for PTSD in the past, so that at intake, it was fully remitted, no symptoms. And let's say you are doing your first 6-month assessment, there is still no symptoms. You would use the PSR1, correct? The PSR1 gets put onto that grid to reflect that what we know about this person is in this reporting interval, they have had no symptoms of PTSD, but we know that they have experienced an episode of this disorder at some point in their life. So so that's that use of the 1. If this is a person that at intake, you know they had some symptoms, they maybe had experienced trauma, there were symptoms of PTSD, but they never hit full criteria. You know that from your baseline assessment. They never met full criteria for PTSD at any point in their life. Then you come in, you do the 6-month assessment, no symptoms of PTSD. That score, you would not enter a PSR on that grid. That's the Kobe protocol. Because the Kobe protocol allows that line to be blank. Now, I'm going to tell you, for some studies, they may say, put the zeros.
Oh.
They allow no, like there are studies that will say no blank lines. If it's nothing, it's a 0. That's where you would use your 0. We are very kind to our assessors and say, just leave it alone. Just leave it alone.
That's only because Teleform used to accidentally interpret some 0s as 6s.
Oh.
So.
Oh, yeah, there you go. It's an ugly sight when you have a grid with all these zeros on it. But that's the difference. So for Kobe, again, leaving the depression and mania, hypomania out of it, all the other diagnoses, if they have a past history of a disorder, either past or current of a disorder, you're going to have something. You are going to have a 1 or above on that PSR line. That's the Kobe protocol. For mania, hypomania, and depression, you want to know all subsyndromal symptoms get coded on those lines. Whether or not they have met full criteria in the past or not, doesn't matter. Any symptoms should be reflected on, anything can be reflected on the PSR line. Am I correct? Okay. So here's my question to you. If they have not had an episode in the past and there's no symptoms, and there's no symptoms in your reporting interval, do you leave it blank? You use ones. Okay. Okay, so those lines will always have a 1 or above on those lines, no matter what the past history is. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? So you can code any PSRs on those lines as they present. Perfect. Okay. So COBE protocol. COBE uses these, has a line for suicidal ideation. Okay. And all levels of suicidal ideation are coded on this line. And this line is never to be left blank. Again, if there's no symptoms, ones, correct. Okay. And this is the scale, again, which was designed through COBE, I believe. This is your original scale. Again, has now been used in other studies. You gotta just sign off on it.
Yeah.
You know, bye COBE. Again, tracking ideation only. It's not so much tracking behavior as it is tracking thoughts and ideation. But this is your 6-point scale that's used. So this is sort of that standard guideline that we had looked at before in terms of offsetting episodes, whether you're using the 6 or the 3-point scale. And then with COBE, again, excluding your depression, mania, hypomania. And we've also talked about the exception of substance use because that DSM requires 12 months. For any of your other disorders, once an episode has remitted, so you've got your 8 weeks or more at a 1 or a 1 or a 2 on a 6-point scale. In order to reflect anything like on a 6-point scale, anything like a 3 or higher, you need to hit full criteria again. So basically, the study protocol is saying, look, for these other disorders, our interest is in episodes. We want to know episodes. We're not, the study is not going to be focusing on what's happening in between. And that's a study decision based on, there's just so much you can look at. So you kind of have to cut your corners. And so for COBE, it's saying for, our non-mood disorders, other than alcohol and other than abuse and dependence, once somebody has ended an episode, you're not going to be able to reflect symptoms again on that line. So you would stay at your 1s until you hit full criteria again, until we start a new episode. Because what we know, what we had already talked about with the mood, with depression, mania, hypomania, those symptoms up, down, and all around, whatever the participant is reporting to you, we want recorded. Everything gets reflected, any level. Will be determined in analysis. Are they in episode? Are they out of episode? All of that happens there. As the assessors, you just want to know, you're going to assign a number to accurately reflect the symptoms that they report in. Okay, abuse and dependence, COBE protocol. Oh my God. Okay. All right, so abuse and dependence, alcohol abuse and dependence per DSM-4 under COBE protocol can be recorded at subthreshold or full criteria.
So it can be onset, yeah.
Yep, can be onset. So whenever symptoms present, you're able to reflect them, whether or not they've actually started an episode or these are just subthreshold symptoms. You want to be looking at those in COBE. So similar to your mood symptoms. Same rule. Whatever is there, we want reflected. So what would be considered a subthreshold symptom, which would be your rating of a 2? And in COBE, there are some examples of what that might look like, because as you know, we use the 3-point scale for abuse, okay? But for DSM, you only need 1 criteria. So what would a 2 even be? So if a study is using a 2, there has to be some rules around what that would be. Same for dependence. What would be considered a 2 if they've never met for an episode? What is a subthreshold symptom? So for COBE, it talks about if a parent is a more reliable informant and the parent is reporting the abuse and dependence symptom, but the adolescent denies them. So then you could go with the parent's report, but keep it at a 2. It wouldn't go higher than subthreshold because it's not a direct report from the participant. Another scenario may be if the adolescent is using to a significant degree, but denies your criteria, denies having any problems, is denying all of your criteria, but there's a significant amount of use. So within COBE, you have some consensus of what's considered a significant amount. And another scenario may be on the dependence line, they endorse, they're reporting their significant use and they only endorse 1. Perhaps they only endorse 1 criteria off the dependence list, then they get the PSR2, okay? So these are some of the examples. In COBE also, you can code the abuse and the dependence line for the same substance. And again, that's a little different than DSM regulation, so it's a protocol modification. And so if the participant has met full criteria for dependence and they're currently meeting an abuse symptom, you're going to be able to see both. Or maybe they're meeting for abuse and they've got only 2, you're going to see maybe if they meet like 2 criteria on dependence, you'd see the abuse coded at full criteria and a PSR2 on dependence to show there's symptoms of both, correct? Okay. So these are all protocol modifications that are clearly stated that influence how kind of the rules of what you can and cannot reflect on the PSR grid. So those of you that are participating and are not in, are not a part of the COBE study, it gives you a sense of where those regulations, where those modifications can be made. And it comes down to what is the information? What do you want to be able to look at in analysis? What do you want to know? And for COBE, knowing all levels of symptoms, all symptom level of abuse or dependence is really a key component. And so this grid will allow you to capture it. You're going to hear it in the interview and it comes down to saying, can I or can I not put this onto the grid? And that's where these rules come in. Again, the abuse and dependence lines for the same substance can be coded simultaneously. All right. How's everybody doing in terms of questions or like overload of detail at this point? That's a lot of information. It is a lot. It's a lot to kind of walk through all at once. How about on the Pittsburgh end?
We're doing okay.
All right, because the next thing I want to be able to do is the vignette. So if this is a good point, if anybody needs to sort of take a break, kind of stretch a little bit. But what I'd like to do is we have a vignette in the packet, written vignette. And you also have in your packet, you have a PSR grid that has dates. That has dates over the week starting with 3/9/17. Does everybody have that? And you have your Vignette 1 for PSR coding that shows previous assessment 3/9/17, current assessment 9/8/17.
Yep.
Okay, so in order to be able to do this exercise, this is really just an exercise of taking the written word, and I always kind of give this disclaimer, it is harder to do this off of a vignette than in an interview. Because you're kind of stuck with the written word, and there may be sections that you're like, geez, I'd want to know more, I'd want to ask a little bit more. So just, do what you can do with what's here. So you have a defined period of time, and the PSR grid is already dated for you, so we know that week 1 starts March 9th, 2017, down through week 26, which starts 8/31/17. And in order to do this, you're going to need the written vignette, you're going to need that grid, and you're going to want your PSR scale, your PSR scales that are also in your packet, the COBE scales, so that you can see what scales you're going to be using. And if you are looking for diagnostic criteria, you have your life booklet that has diagnostic criteria in it, starting with the mood disorders. So what I want folks to do is to just take a few minutes and take this information and see how it goes with translating it into PSRs and coding your grid.
So it's the one that says coding vignette. It's from March 9th to September 8th. Sure. And then this is the shaded grid that has the date starting from March 9th as
Change points, Claire.
You guys do this for a living. I couldn't make it too easy.
Like, come on, Claire. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Just fill my water.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, it's down below. It's all good.
Below the wires.
It's below the
It's below the wires.
I mean, it makes sense though.
I did that purposely. I was like, oh, you guys do
We
this
can't
already.
make this too easy on these people.
Right.
Heather actually like needs some more caffeine.
I saw AS. I was like, is this one of our
No,
ASs?
I
Did you
really
start
thought
reading
that
for
too.
AS?
I don't know.
We have a
When
few ASs, Claire. So
Oh.
when I saw that, I was like, is this going to be one of the droids we're looking for?
No.
Right, yeah.
No.
But as I said, elementary school teacher.
I had a limited
Oh,
access
Exactly.
to previously determined vignettes, so I'm like, oh, okay, we'll go with it.
Yeah, the second sentence is not him.
Yeah.
Hey Claire, I have a quick question in the vignette.
Mhm.
So when you talk about, I'm like in that like second week of July period, it mentions that the symptoms got worse. Is this like, is the anhedonia in addition to the other symptoms you've been experiencing before that? The loss of interest, is that in addition to what was reported for June? I mean, it would make sense if, it's just not clear there if that is the case.
Well, because it'll go through,
Does that make sense?
because it talks about the anhedonia.
Yeah,
As
but I
you
mean,
read
but
through.
it doesn't mention the other, I'm just wondering, are the other
Well, it does
symptoms
say
still?
the down road 4 days a week. Is that the part you're talking about?
It's after that. So it says in the second week of July, his symptoms worsened, and he recalls that the depression became more persistent. He reports feeling down most of the day, and then a loss of interest for pleasure in things. But there isn't mention of the other symptoms, and I'm wondering, were the other symptoms gone, or was it just?
Oh, keep reading. Keep
I'm
reading.
sorry. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry.
No, keep it, yeah, no, there's more. There's more.
Sorry.
Yeah, it
That's what
actually,
happens, yeah.
yep, it's a little, it's just, formatted a little bit. different.
I'm sorry.
Where we
Okay.
see some of the information. Okay. Okay, yeah.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Got it. Yes.
You just answered my question.
Yes.
Well, I kind of.
July, yes, more or less it they have. And then yes, it's so severe. I don't know. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's not like 40 or anything. Yeah, but for me, 6 is like more severe. It's like more or less. This is 5. As usual, depressive symptoms, I mean, I will not get 6. I would write at the beginning between 3 or 4, maybe in July 5, but not 6. Ever. I don't think that it's so severe. My opinion, I don't know. No, maybe because here he's talking about regular depressive symptoms, nothing else. You know what I mean?
Look at all these changes. Sorry. Aw.
Some interviews, though. It's not very-
I know, one disorder people.
Trust me.
Yeah, I know.
You're welcome.
I remember
It's not
spending
12 to 20 something.
I remember spending 2 hours assessing depression the day 2 before. I remember that. Heather, do you remember day 2 that with all the kids?
Repeat. Do I not remember?
The babysitting the 5 kids while I assessed for depression. She was my babysitter.
That's what I did.
She was my babysitter, which is awesome.
I can bring you in the next
sprint to my office. Okay.
Yep. Change points, but 1 disorder.
No, that's awesome. I didn't incorporate some mixed. I mean, that would be mean.
Very careful. Very careful. No, but you do in the role. But I was like, oh, I don't want to be here all day.
Second week of July. It was been every day.
And your grids were already dated. And your grids were already dated.
So my grids would have been dated already because we use these nuts to do that.
I know, I did.
Take old school. Had a pen.
Exactly like. Yeah. What I changed, I did 3 for week 8. Yeah. 1 Monday.
You can talk about that.
Like,
It's sort of good.
Yeah, like that's why I like.
So you introduce the concept?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's sort of that.
So yeah, that would be because there's a week. Yeah.
Isn't that made?
I don't know which one either.
I did that a little bit.
It doesn't exclusively say that's it.
Things got a little bit better, but that doesn't mean that it went away. I tend to be a little bit more concerned about that. But it's a good thing for us. I don't know. You're the trainer, you know best.
Right, because we're going to talk about it. I can introduce it in this that's as an example of what sometimes people say. I can. Being very generous with the role play. Don't ever think it's a thing yet. Just a science teacher.
Doesn't matter.
So that again.
Here is like 4 weeks, and this one looks like 5. Is for some reason, special reason or not? Just
I'm not sure the exact reason behind it. I know though it matches up with our in Kobe what we do. So the PSF, the months. I think it's every 3rd month. It's 5 weeks instead of 4. That's just kind of how they broke it down.
okay.
So I guess that's lining up with the months on the PSF. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
4 weeks, 4 weeks, and 5. 4 weeks, 4 weeks, and 5.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah. It's
just a way of working that out. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we started doing that to help with the gap school. So when you looked at your grid, you could see your what weeks fell into 1, 2, 3, just to give you a visual.
Yeah.
So we started doing the bowling.
I just tell people it's because of the leap year.
Yeah.
If you don't do it that way, you won't get things come out wrong at the end of the year. Right? It's the issue of how many weeks in a year. Always forward, so they use that pattern. I could get into a conversation of, and then if somebody says something in relation to the menstrual cycle, it's every 4 weeks versus 4, 4, 5. Versus, we can go down any rabbit hole you want.
Versus the people on depot.
Yeah.
I think she's had you from the thing. I think she's sorry, you know.
Hey.
Okay, how's everybody doing here?
It's because I was like talking to you while I was doing it.
Yeah.
I was like, Claire, can you please clarify?
Read on.
Read my vignette, silly. Don't ask me questions.
Yeah. Really good. Like, I need that. Yeah.
And then also need to know like how are you checking?
Yeah.
The non-brain research day, like submitting a poster.
Like,
What are the
ones that have awards? Yeah, I would just ask.
So it's still initial, but basically,
Say they've never had.
intake, there's no difference between
Okay.
PPD and BD in terms of prescribed medications. Over follow-up, he had medications, and the onset of polypharmacy was very significant the first so you had a sharp you got a sharp first, and then it levels up a little bit.
Are you looking at specific groups of medications?
7 classes.
How's it going in Pittsburgh?
Good. Oh, good.
I think, do you guys need more time?
No, I think we're good.
I think
Okay.
we all rated it.
Okay, how about here? We good? Good enough, close enough. All right, so, okay, so just kind of some general feedback in terms of what questions that this might have brought up before we look at the coding. I really just want to get a sense of, you know, doing this, did it bring up any questions for you, or things that you thought you knew but maybe not so sure, or things that I just never mentioned as we've gone through this afternoon? Are there any questions that kind of come to mind first before we look at the coding?
I don't think so. I thought it was written pretty well.
Ah, thanks. Thanks for that. It's always the challenge of putting together a vignette of not just doing it for you in the vignette. You know what I mean? It's like, I got to give you a lot of information, but like enough so you have to kind of think about it. I know. It's, yeah, it's, it is a bit of a challenge. So I appreciate that at least it read well. So now we'll see how we did with the scoring, because, and this I really want to put out there, that I'm going to show you, I'm going to put up the grid with this scored. And I really want people to feel comfortable kind of asking questions or challenging. If there's scores that I put up, if you're feeling like, okay, I don't get it. Like, how could you, I don't see it. How we went with that score, how we went with a 3 versus a 4, or, you know, a 5 versus a 6. Like, you know, just, this is about being able to have that kind of conversation. And, you know, those of you that do this know that when participants give you change points that they're talking about, you know, like that are noted in here, they talk about things changing in early May. You know, that sometimes, you know, sometimes when you're doing this type of assessment with someone, the points at which they're recalling a change may not be a specific date. Sometimes it is, because it's tied to an event, and they're like, oh, yeah, I can tell you when that happened. But sometimes it's a month. And so in the assessment, you're saying, well, do you remember if it was early, middle, late? You know, you're trying to kind of get yourself within that 2-week kind of window, as best, as tight as we can. And so when we're doing this with the written word, there's that little bit of fluctuation that maybe a change point is in, week 3 and not week 4, or somebody else might have said week 4, but there's some flexibility in that. So I say that with, to, know that this is, we can have some discussion around it as we look at this coding. This is the scale that matches, or hopefully matches, with where folks went with their choice of PSRs and their choice of change points. Because what we know, and we know what was going on at the time of the last assessment. That's what that initial paragraph shares. And when you're using the life, the assumption is you're in follow-up. You've at least had a baseline done. You're somewhere along the way in follow-up. For some studies, you're years in. You are well along your way with this participant. For some, you maybe are doing your first follow-up, but there's something. You have some type of record of what went on at the previous assessment. So whether that was a previous follow-up or a baseline assessment, you have some idea of what was going on. And that's what the point of this first paragraph is, to give you some of that so that you know where you're picking the story up from. And so the initial coding for this particular participant from the start of the reporting interval until we get to early May, which in this case, week 9 represents sort of that first full week in May. The symptom presentation is given a PSR3. And how does that work with everybody's scoring? Are people comfortable with that scoring, or do you feel like you wanted to give it a different PSR?
I think we were pretty consistent with that, with the 3.
Okay, great, because we've got this most of the day, but 3 days a week. So we don't have the persistence, and we don't have the number of criteria to move us any closer to a full criteria presentation. And his description of impairment was more on the mild level. He wasn't missing work, just taking him longer to get some things done. It's something that he noticed about himself, so more on the mild level. We have our change point is in early May, which again, on this grid, we are using week 9. And at that point, there's a denial of symptoms. Now, one of the things that you notice, it doesn't state clearly whether these symptoms just kind of stopped abruptly or there was sort of a fading away of these symptoms. So without it said specifically that there's like a fade of symptoms, and sometimes this comes up for participants that, they may say, I don't know, it just, started to kind of fade away. I know when I was done. They know when it was at its worst, and they know, at what point they just were better, like nothing was going on. And between those 2 points in time, it just sort of generally faded away. Sometimes that's as good as they can give you for an explanation. And in that case, you're able to sort of taper the symptoms, taper the PSRs downward. You sort of know when it was at its worst, and the point at which they know for sure there's nothing left. And you look at sort of what you have for weeks in between there, and you can reflect as best, their best report is just a general fade. So you sort of divide those weeks out between your 4, your 3s, and your 2s until you know for sure here we're at 1s. That's something that you're able to do. Depending on the length of time that taper happens over, it may impact your reliability score. You may say, we're down into fair because there was an awful lot of, I don't know what was going on in between here. It was still there, but it just sort of gave this general fade. Sometimes that period of time is like little. It's like maybe 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks of fade, and then we're done. In this case, it didn't really speak to it, so we're going to just go with it was there and then it wasn't. So we go down to our 1s. We go down in May where there's this period of time where they're symptom-free, and then the symptoms return. The symptoms return in early June. And again, so week 13 was chosen as early June because that's the beginning of the month. That's sort of the first full week of the month in there. And we have enough symptoms to warrant a PSR4. So we've got the symptoms are present for most of the day, but 4 days a week. We have the depressed mood, low energy, decrease in appetite, difficulty concentrating, depressed mood, low energy, decrease in appetite, difficulty concentrating. Yep, we've got impairment and we've got moderate distress. So we've only got 4 criteria and they're there 4 days a week. Again, most of the day, but about 4 days a week. In general, for the depression, particularly major depression criteria, when it talks about most of the day, nearly every day, the standard rule of thumb for nearly every day is at least 5 days or more in a week. That's sort of how you're going to judge that. It gives you sort of a consensus among your interviewers to say if it's there 5 days or more, that's, nearly every day. So we're going with our PSR4 till we hit July, and things get worse again in the second week in July. So on this grid, the second full week is actually the week that begins July 6th. The majority of the week before was in July as well. So we made the change point week 18. Certainly I wouldn't, it wouldn't be considered wrong if somebody chose week 19 to go with, but the standard would be week 18. And at that point, they're endorsing, the participant endorses full criteria symptoms. So now we've got a daily depressed mood that's there most of the day, every day, along with the loss of interest. We've got, as you see in the write-up, it goes into describing how some of these have actually caused their impairment. So the description of impairment comes earlier in the paragraph. And we know that when those 2 symptoms were present, we have a low interest, we have low energy, we have a loss of appetite, and difficulty sleeping as well during this period of time. So we hit 5 symptoms that are there daily for most of the day and had caused impairment and significant distress. So we're hitting full criteria. And the participant report staying at that level until the past 3 weeks. So the last 3 weeks on your grid, you've got the coding for the return to a PSR3 level where it's only present, maybe half the day, 3 days a week, low energy, difficulty sleeping. So we've got 2 symptoms along with the depressed mood, still with some mild distress, but we don't have impairment any longer. So the symptom cluster would warrant the assigning of the PSR3 based on the PSR scale for major depression. How'd everybody do?
Good. I
Makes
think
sense.
we're pretty consistent.
Good, good. And for those of you that haven't used the scale before, how did it feel having to kind of pull symptoms out and pay attention to your time frame?
That was fairly easy to follow.
That's good.
Okay, good. So that, again, the purpose of this was to give you just that feeling of sort of looking for your symptom cluster within specific periods of time. And when does the participant report those changing? Now we've still got about an hour that we can use this afternoon. What I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the psychosocial functioning section, if that's okay, and we can take a quick look at medication grids as well. But I'd really like to look at the psychosocial functioning section of the life, or the A-Life. You've got the A-Life in front of you. So in the A-Life that you have in front of you, the psychosocial section starts on page 51.
Thank you. Here, you can share.
I wonder if because I'm not going to use slides. for this section, I can do a stop share and it'll just be the screen. I'll just have them, right? I know.
Somebody on speed dial in case it doesn't.
I know. So going through the psychosocial functioning section, I'm not going to use a PowerPoint. We're really going to kind of talk our way through based on what you have in front of you. I am considering trying to see if I stop the PowerPoint that I don't lose everyone. So there's my little gift from me to you. We could always just leave this slide up.
I like it.
So, you know, just take a minute. Just take a minute, breathe. This is one of my pictures. This is actually a real beach. This is at Roy Carpenter's Beach. Okay. There you go, in the Tunic in Rhode Island. So a little, you know, since I've been doing a lot of beach time lately, I've been doing a lot of beach walks lately. So, you know, it's good for the soul to just, you know, just take a minute. Take a minute. So I can leave this up when we talk about psychosocial, and then I won't be afraid I'm going to lose all of you. Okay. All right. Does everybody have the A-Life kind of the booklet in front of you?
Yeah, we're sharing.
You're sharing. Okay, sharing's good. Sharing's good. So again, I want to be able to walk through this for the purpose of the recording and also for those that are with us to, you know, to kind of talk about some of the do's and don'ts of this section. And I would really like to invite those that have been using this to, you know, share if there's any struggles that you've been having with this or ways in which you feel like are helpful to, as you're moving the conversation through this section of the assessment tool. So one of the things that's important to note about this is that this section of the life assessment, or the A-Life, was designed to follow the diagnostic section. It was not designed to be a standalone assessment tool. Now, I know for a fact it has been. I can think of a couple studies where it's like they have other diagnostic assessments and then they use this part of the life. And it's like, ooh, that's a little bit of a struggle because it was meant to follow this, a semi-structured assessment. It was meant to follow a conversation where you have gotten a lot of descriptive detail. Every time you turn the page in the life and you go on to the next disorder, and if you're assessing for symptoms, you start from the top of your criteria list, work your way down. You're assessing through the same period of time for each disorder. You start at the beginning of your time period and you walk through for your depressive symptoms. You go back to the beginning, you walk through for your mania, hypomania symptoms, back to the beginning for your social phobia, and so on. So by the time you get to this section, you have a lot of information about the participant. You have a lot of information about impairment, because each time you've assessed for a disorder, you have asked about impairment or distress. And so you have gotten some of that information. And you've gotten it multiple times in the same time period that you're covering for this section. So what this section, the purpose of doing this particular section now is it's going to break down the different realms in functioning and asks the participant to focus on the particular areas of functioning. And now you're going to take into consideration any and all psychopathology. This is the deal. What you don't want to consider is non-psychopathology. Now, reasons for impairment that have nothing to do with psychopathology. They had the flu, they had an injury, or they're not working because they were laid off. That had no reflection on any psychopathology, companies downsizing, they're out. So those types of issues are not going to come into play when we're looking at impairment. They're not going to be factored into the score. You want to keep it on psychopathology, but any and all that you have heard of. So when you get to this section as the interviewer, you sort of want to take a minute and take stock in what you know already. You know this time period. You know when symptoms were more heightened than other periods of time. You know that there may be areas that they've always said consistently, no, I never let it impact my work. Nope, never impacts my work, never impacts my work. Well, we're going to revisit work. And you're going to re-ask your question, acknowledging that, saying, you know, when we were talking about this before, you've always said you felt like it didn't. So how do you do at work? You know, you're still going to revisit the section. You're not going to skip anything. But you're going to factor in the information. You're going to put on the table what you've already talked about. You're not going to make it seem like this is the beginning of a whole new interview. So again, this was designed with that in mind. What happens in the psychosocial section between the life and the A-life, the difference has to do with more how it's ordered. Like in the A-life, you see the student work is the first section you come to. Well, in the adult version, in the life, it's work, it's employment. You know, so the scales, however, are not different. And also, studies will decide which pages of this section they want. Like sometimes studies will pull some out that they don't want to use. And they'll do that more in the interest of time. They know they're not going to be doing anything with the information, and they're like, you know what, we're going to shorten this up. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Again, that gets decided before you get going. But what I want to do today is just to sort of allow people, as you have this in front of you, is I want to kind of walk through the pages because they look worse than they are. Let's just put that out there. It looks worse than it is. In the A-life, again, we start with student work, and it goes in from there. It goes to relationships. Is that right? Oh, yep. We're going to go into relationships both with family and with friendships. And then it returns to look at any employment, household functioning, recreation. For the COBE study, they also have questions on sexual functioning as well. And from there, it will code menstrual status and then an overall satisfaction question. One of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to take this a little bit out of order, only because I want you to look at, on page 52 is the student work, and then 57 is your employment, and 58 is your household. And there's a similarity between those three categories. All three of those are the only three that have like a skip out up top that you're allowed to code. So we can look at it on the student page, but know that it presents on the student, the employment, and the household. So basically it's saying, you know, you may be talking to somebody who's not a student, has not been a student in your whole reporting interval. You're talking with somebody that's maybe, 20 years old, they're out of high school, they're not going to college. And so there's no coding of impairment to be looking at month by month. However, by using the skip out up top, and it's that section that begins with the line, only if a participant has not been formally enrolled in some kind of student program. That section that has the two little blank lines. It's basically saying, okay, so they're not in school. Why? This is what it wants to know. Tell me why. Are they not in school because of psychopathology, or is it some other reason? Or both. It can be both. So perhaps they're not in school because genuinely, I have no money. I have no money to pay for this. Yep, at some point I'm going to go, but not right now. I'm working. I don't have the funds for classes. That is my only reason. And there's nothing about any of the conversation that you've had in the diagnostic section that would make you question that answer. You're like, got it. So in that case, we're saying that in that little section, we're going to code we can code the yes or the no in any order, and we can have 2 yeses, but we can't have 2 nos. It's got to be one or the other. So in that situation, we're going to say, where it says indicate here if it was because of psychopathology, on that line, we put the number 1. No, it wasn't. And or for some other reason, yes. For that particular example, it's because they don't have the funds to be going to school right now, okay? That's good. That fits with everything you know about them. That's what we're going to go with. So then you can leave the bottom boxes blank.
You just email them the psychosocial functioning form so they can see with the code. We have the skip outs with the dots.
Perfect. Got it. There are going to be studies that sort of take the skip out and require you to code all, just again, they don't want any blanks, code it all. But just so you know that in the format that you'll have in front of you that you end up using, that is there for the student work, employment as well. So perhaps you're interviewing a 16-year-old and they're not working, nor would they be expected to work. And that's the reason. It's not due to psychopathology. Household, a lot less common that we have a whole skip out, unless it's like there's a physical injury or something that in this period of time I've done nothing because I have been laid up with a back injury. I've really not been able to do anything. It's, or
They were in a residential placement that didn't involve housework.
right, exactly. They didn't have any chores that they had to be doing. Then you can use that skip out. But I just want to kind of point that out as we go through these. The scales are also very similar for student, household, and employment sections. The scales read very similar. So basically, when you come into this section, like I said, you have information that you know about them. So you're going to sort of cluster, if you can, you're going to kind of cluster your periods of time. You're going to think, is there any period of time that we just talked about that there weren't any symptoms going on? There was nothing no type of psychopathology. And for some, that can be, that there were blocks of time that they were just symptom-free. And you'll have some sense of that. So you can kind of break this time period into pieces as best fits how your conversation has been going so far. So you might say, we were talking about, I know we've been covering from last August until today, but, as we were talking about it, you were saying actually from August until like November, until the holidays started and the weather was changing, there wasn't anything going on. So let's look at that period of time first. And you can kind of get a sense of how are things going at school for you? How are things going with grades? What kind of classes are you taking? All of those kind of pieces, and then get a sense if there was, is this something that they were able to keep up with what was expected of them, or were they functioning at even higher level? And now let's start to look at when we know, okay, in November, you talked about the down mood was around, and at that point you found yourself worrying more. So now you're introducing what you know about psychopathology. So now you're going to kind of bring them to that point, and these were the things, these were the symptoms that were just starting to roll. Were these things? Was the worry, was the low mood, that low energy, were those things getting in the way of you keeping up with your work, your school responsibilities? Were they getting in the way of school? And if so, how so? Give me some examples. And the example, the key to coding a psychosocial functioning section is examples. It really is one of the most important pieces. Examples, examples, examples. So, when they say, yeah, it was a lot harder. It was hard. I wasn't doing everything I was supposed to. What does that mean? Like, what kind of things were you not doing? What kind of things were you not able to do? You can always ask, what kind of things were you able to do? Some of these examples may have already come up, and you may say, I know you shared earlier that, right around the Thanksgiving week, you were really missing. Just before that holiday hit, you just kind of stopped going to class for a bit. Is that right? Like you're repeating it back. You want to make sure this is still accurate, but it is a way of saying, acknowledging we've had some of this conversation. So you get to pull it in. And so this is really some of the work of the interview for the assessor, is now it's time for you to kind of start pulling it in. Now this diagnostic section, you may have been sitting there for a couple hours and you flip to the psychosocial and you're thinking, we are almost done. You are not almost done. You are not almost done. Do not let it all go. Pull it together. It is your job to pull it together.
Sometimes, I've noticed in my assessments that sometimes things come up in the psychosocial section that they just didn't mention at all in the psychopathology section. You're like, how did that happen? But okay, tell me about it.
Oh, yes.
So it's always a good cross-reference.
It is your time to cross-reference. Whenever you're presenting, saying, earlier you had shared, you always state it in a way that it leaves open the door for oh, no, that wasn't then. Keep it on yourself. It's like, oh, okay, I must have, because you may have to go back to that page earlier in the diagnostic section and reassess. You may reopen a whole lot of stuff. I'll tell you, my favorite example is way back when, using the life in the HARP study, and we were doing reliability, all sorts of different reliability tests for it. And so we were going in and 2 people were interviewing the same person within a week over the same period of time. And we had someone, I kid you not, it was in psychosocial section that he remembered a period of time he wasn't working at all due to depression. It did not go for weeks, never mentioned it. So the interviewer has to go back, reassess, right? And is like dying in her mind of like, oh boy, I hope this comes up next time, right? Same way. I was the second person. Same scenario. Never mentions it till we get to the psychosocial. I'm thinking, wow, I hope the first person caught this because this is crazy. 3 weeks you forgot to say you didn't go to work. When I asked, did it get in the way in anything, I'm telling you, it was crazy, but he was consistent, he was reliable, and it got caught both times. But it is your chance to double check. This is it. So really you are not almost done. You now want to really kind of get your head in the game of, all right, what do we know here? Put on the table what you think you know, what you think you've talked about, in a way so that if they need to make adjustments, it is your last opportunity to do it. It can be done. It's not a big deal. Make your adjustments. But also in a way that it's acknowledging, we've been talking about this. I know we've talked about this. So I don't want to be repeating questions like we're starting from scratch here. Again, which is why this section was designed to follow the diagnostic section. Because you do need that information. You need to know what's going on for psychopathology so you can have a sense of what direction you may want to be heading here. Getting the examples of the impairment is really key. What classes are they taking? Are they missing classes? Are papers getting in late? How late? I get it turned in. Is it getting turned in late and how late is late? Because somebody may be really worked up about the fact that they don't get it in during class, but not till the end of that day, versus somebody else who's like, it wasn't that long. I don't know. It was before the end of the semester. You're like, all right, that couldn't have gone well. Get a sense of what's going on with grades. Does it impact grades? A description so that you can picture what things were like. The key is that they understand and that you understand you're talking about the symptoms that you guys had, that this person had already presented to you, any of the symptoms that were happening in this block of time. And so any of these things may be impairing. There may be some things that didn't bother them at school, but other parts of the symptoms did. So any and all impairment due to psychopathology is what we want to know here. The scales have mild, moderate, and severe. That's for the assessor to determine. You're not asking the participant if it was mild, moderate, or severe. You're getting your examples. So mild would be the types of impairment, the types of things that are noticeable to the person may not necessarily be noticeable to somebody else. Common phrases are like, yeah, I had to push myself harder. Like I was dragging to get to class. I was there, you know, I was getting things in, but it was taking me longer to do my assignments. How much longer? You know, that comes into play, especially at work. And people are like, yeah, I had to stay later. How much later are you staying? You know, 15 minutes, 30 minutes versus, well, I'm leaving at 9. Usually I leave at 5, it's 9 p.m. and I'm leaving 9 p.m. 3 days a week. It's like, ooh, ouch. You know, well, maybe that's a little more in the moderate end of things. But again, the examples give you that opportunity to have that conversation. So the examples will help you decide mild, moderate. Moderate is probably noticeable to other people, may not have resulted in being spoken to. That all varies from the particular job they're in. I mean, we all know, everybody knows their own job, and really, how long does it take before someone catches on with like, wow, things aren't going so great. For other jobs, people are right on it, right? So, you know, again, those examples, if they're missing, if they're leaving early, how early are you leaving? If they're staying later, how late? If you I missed work, how many days did you miss? In a given week. You're coding, in this category, you're really coding a monthly score. And, okay, not in Kobe?
For the worst week of the month.
Right. But you're not coding every week.
Right.
So you're coding the monthly score, but you want the lowest level of functioning, the worst week of the month. So a bad day, not necessarily going to throw the whole thing off, depending on how bad that day was. But not necessarily something that's going to alter the score, but you want something that lasts for like the majority of the week. So, you know, if somebody says, oh yeah, in the summer, I missed probably 3 days of work. 3 days of work spread out, 3 days of work in 1 week. When was that week? We want to look at that. That's your, you know, now we've got 3 days that are clustering together that was missed. That's going to lower the score in that month. So those types of pieces. So whether you are coding this on the Kobe psychosocial functioning scannable forms, or you've got the, you know, pen and paper that some of us still use. Yep, a little old school, it's all good. You know, sometimes power goes out, people. Know where you put your pens. So you've got these boxes. Personally, I don't fill the boxes in during the interview because I want my notes taken in real time. You know, early May to mid-June, no symptoms, you know, satisfactory. Mid-June, you know, I'm going to be writing down the examples of impairment. I will determine my score during the conversation. I'm going to write in my notes what I want this score to be. And I do that in this section to make sure I've asked enough questions. Because if I can't decide, oh, is this mild or a moderate? Let me ask something else. I need another example. You know, there's something else I need to ask to feel comfortable with what I want to score. There are also, you're given the option in your coding of a 6. And on this scale, that reflects that there's reasons, kind of psychopathology and for some other reasons.
Yeah, that's a yes at the top.
Oh, you can use, okay, but what if it's just 1 month? If you're not skipping out? Yes,
Right.
it is. So Matt was just saying, like at the top, if I've skipped out, that would look like a yes if they didn't have student work or employment at all. But if there's 1 month where they didn't work at all, so we're coding our boxes, we haven't been able to skip out altogether, that would be your 6. So perhaps they got laid off, but it was really psychopathology that was about that decision. That their psychopathology was causing them, causing impairment in their work brought them to the point of being laid off. So they weren't working. Or perhaps they were laid off, but they're not working because their psychopathology is interfering with interviewing, of actually getting started with getting the interviews and getting another job. So you can really have these time periods where there's a couple things that came into play, and you want to be able to reflect them both, and that's what it will allow you to do. That's what that score allows you to do, to say, nah, not so clean. There's a couple different things happening here. But yeah, he lost his job, not so much due to psychopathology, but he's still unemployed because this is really interfering with his ability to interview and get his applications out. So again, the student work, household, employment scales are very, very similar. That's, this is sort of how you want your conversation to go. Take your notes, choose your score as you're talking, incorporate into the conversation what you already know that's come up in the diagnostic section, and keep the person engaged, because again, this is their chance to say, yep, that's right. That was when that happened. And they're reinforcing that the whole diagnostic section was clean as could be. And you had it all right the first time. In this, as you go through the psychosocial section, you'll see that the scales change depending on what section you're in. So the family section is looking at family relationships. It's broken down by biological parents, adoptive parents, step-parents, siblings, significant others, girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, child. All of those categories fall under family. Do you have, in terms of under family, when you code a significant other, is there a guideline that you use for, in COBE, do you use a guideline for how long they may be living together?
1 year. Yeah.
1 year. So you stay with the standard. Okay, because that's a standard piece in the life. Coding someone that they're living with under family, as a family relationship, it would be they've been living together for a year or more. And otherwise, that person gets coded under friendship. They're counted in the count, but that's usually the standard. And just to have some kind of standard of who's living with who. So as you're going through these sections, and again, we don't need to, I'm not going to walk through every scale, but what you're going to see on the scales, there's information in parentheses, and the parentheses are what you as the interviewer want to pay attention to. Those are your guidelines. Those help you, the information that's in there helps you formulate your question. So again, you're not saying, well, let's talk about, your relationship with your mom, since we last met in September. How would you describe your relationship with your mom? Oh, it's good. It's good. Okay. That's not rateable. It matches your scale, but it's not rateable. So, do you guys have disagreements? Do you have arguments? If so, how long does it take to resolve? How often? How often do you even have contact? Is it good because you don't speak? Or somebody says, oh, it's typical mother-daughter relationship. It's like, again, I can't rate that. I don't know. We got to break it down. What's in close, argue, avoid. This is what you want to know. That's what's in parentheses. Okay. And that's what you want to walk through. And I'm going to tell you, this section can take a while because if someone has a lot of siblings, if they have a lot of siblings, because if you look at the scale, you have the score of 6 and 7, which is variable, which means you have more than one person in the category and they don't all get the same score because, why would they? And this section is it's really not as tightly tied to psychopathology either. That it may be due to the other person's behavior, that they may have a poor relationship, and that may be actually a good thing for our participant. It may be no direct reflection on the participant's psychopathology. You really are scoring their opinion of their relationship with these individuals. But when you have categories that there's more than one individual, and again, that can be step-parents, siblings is the most common. You have these two options. So basically a 6 is saying, look, I have more than one person in this category, and somebody in the category gets a good or better, and somebody does not. And the score of 7 is I got more than one person in this category and nobody is getting a good or better. And that's really all you need to know. So to assess that, you got to kind of break it down. And to save yourself your sanity, actually, as you're going through this, when somebody says, I have 10 brothers and sisters. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, I will never get home tonight because we're going to spend the rest of this time in this section. You are going to kind of cluster. You allow them to sort of group. So are there do you get along with any of your brothers and sisters? Do you feel close to any of your brothers and sisters? Oh, yeah. This one. Okay, so which of your brothers and sisters do you feel close to? So of them, out of that group, do you argue? If so, how long, get a sense of, does this little grouping that they initially presented as similar, how similar do they stay? And then we have people in the category that they're not reporting feeling as close to, so you want to start to assess those folks and to see, does anybody in there fall below that good? What would be considered a good, a score of good? And that's what will save you your time. So you are allowed to sort of cluster. Otherwise, if you've got 2 people in, assess both individually, assess parents as individuals. You want to kind of get some kind of breakdown. If they've got 3 siblings, assess all 3. Save the grouping for when you got a group. But again, it's pay attention to what is in parentheses. If you're going to use this for the first time, do yourself a favor and sort of read through that and give yourself an idea of what it is you want to be asking about. Again, it's about, do they feel close? If you find yourself arguing or disagreeing about things, how long to resolve, and how often do you have contact?
And since you're scoring the worst week of each month, if you know there was a week where they were a 5 for depression, find out if it was different during that.
Right, because sometimes it will change the quality, how they feel about a relationship. Sometimes they'll say no, that the relationship stayed solid. So you get to give them that opportunity. But it's true, you kind of want to walk them through this time period. When you get into the scales of friendship, again, very good, good, fair, poor. Very poor means totally different things than it did in your family relationships. Pay attention to what is in parentheses. How many people do you consider to be close friends, and what's the frequency of contact? And contact is, are they texting? Are they, talking on the phone? Are they seeing the person? You're talking on the phone. Sorry, nobody does that anymore. But you never know. So again, pay attention to parentheses and allow them that descriptor. And was there a point in time at which it was different? Any time where due to psychopathology or these relationships were just different. And that, that's a common one to have change points, that a relationship may have just sort of faded away. Somebody has moved, they don't see them, they don't feel as close anymore. So somebody has dropped out of the count at a certain point. Again, you're going to code their employment status. Are they working full-time, part-time, kind of overall? And you can code up to 3 categories. So somebody who's working part-time and then moved up to full-time, you get to code both. Recreation is another scale that is, again, very good, good, fair, poor, means totally different things than your other use of good, fair, poor. Pay attention to the scale, pay attention to what's in parentheses. In recreation, you're assessing, you need to know, what do you like to do? Just when you have some time. When you have some time to yourself, what do you like to do? Sometimes you have to remind them of, this isn't necessarily just physical activity. It includes reading books, listening to music, spending time with friends, like any of it. Some of this you've already talked about because they've made reference to out with friends, or so it's like, oh, I know you like to go to the gym. You've talked about being able to go to the gym. So you, for instance, with our vignette, he likes to work on his boat. So we know these things. We bring them in, anything else. And then what we're assessing is sort of the number of things that they're interested in doing. And have they been doing these things during any particular months? And if so, are they enjoying it? Because maybe they're doing it and their enjoyment becomes limited. Or their enjoyment, they just stop, maybe they've limited doing it altogether. But there's all sorts of different combinations there. And so that's what you want to know. That's what the scale really captures. Number of activities and enjoyment level. in those activities. And so their rating on the scale is based on fluctuation between those two components. Do you have anything, because I haven't used the sexual functioning scale in a long time. Is there anything in particular, Kobe folks, that you want to make note?
The last question, level of sexual risk, that more recently we got into more detail because people were interested in it for analyses and a paper. So we actually have a recent Kobe paper based upon that. The rest of these were sort of as originally designed, but that's another example of, okay, here we want to get some more detail, let's expand upon it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there are studies that won't use this section at all in the A-Life. And if it's not something they're going to look at in analysis, it really is, it's really an area that they would prefer to not directly ask questions about. So it really will vary from study to study. The last question is one I want to kind of pay a little attention to. Because the last question is the satisfaction question, and this is based on the participants' opinion. This is really their opinion. And it's a really, as an interviewer, I find it an interesting question because now you have gone through the whole diagnostic section. You really have a sense of what these past 6 months or the past year has been like for this individual. You have your opinion. We want to get their opinion on this. And it is a section that you can't guess. You just can't guess, and it's really going to vary from person to person. So you want to kind of set the stage of saying, you know, at this point I'm going to ask just kind of your opinion, your overall assessment of how satisfied are you with life in general, just sort of life in general. This isn't just about psychopathology. This is about their opinion of how things are going for them. If that has changed at all, you know, over this period of time. Again, pay attention to what's in parentheses. For me, when I do this, my personal style is I literally make 2 columns on whatever I'm writing on for notes. I have dissatisfied and satisfied. And I'm going to ask them about the dissatisfied first so I can finish on my satisfied end. But I'm going to ask them, are there things that you're not satisfied with? Now, again, some of this may have come up, and I'll quickly follow that with, like, I know you've talked about how you really want to move. You know, you really want to get out of where you're living. So if there's something that they've been saying all along, don't pretend that they haven't, and put that right out there. And so, you know, are there other things that you feel like you're just not satisfied with? And it tends to be sort of a current answer, and then I'm going to ask them, has it been like that for the past 6 months, or was there a point in time at which there's some of these things you were more satisfied with than you are now? Like, I'm going to kind of track it a little differently. But I have my 2 columns, so now I know what they're dissatisfied in and what are the things that you're satisfied with. Again, if I know something's come up, I'm going to say, like, I know you were talking about, you know, you really are happy with this new job that you have, that really made, you know, that's something you're feeling good about. Are there other things that you also feel like you're satisfied with how things are going? So I have 2 columns, and I'm really looking to see, am I balanced? Or is this a situation where I've got most things on the satisfied side and I've only got 1, maybe 2 things on dissatisfied? Then I'm going to want to know, of the things that you're not satisfied with, how dissatisfied are you? You know, and that's their opinion of, well, a little bit, or, you know, there can be one thing there and it really bothers them. They are so unhappy with it. But it's one thing, so it doesn't put them lower than a fair. Because to get a poor or below, they're dissatisfied in most areas. So if it's only one thing, even if it's really strong, it would keep them in that fair category. And again, so you're looking at what, you know, kind of what's their count of dissatisfied and satisfied? What is their balance with that? And of the things that they're not satisfied with, what's their level of dissatisfaction in their opinion? And then that's how you're able to kind of code as you go through. And again, it's really interesting because it does bring you to that place where you have your opinion. And it is that place where there are individuals that may have a lot of reason to have a long list and dissatisfied, and they don't. That they find a balance. And their perspective is allows them to have a nice, strong, satisfied column. And there are others that you may find that you're like, seriously, we're going to come up with something and dissatisfied, and yet they do. But this is really their opinion, and it's a really nice opportunity to sort of get that final global perspective from them in this section. And it's a good way to sort of end the interview. It sort of closes out this section of the interview nicely in your conversation. So again, if you're going to use this section for the first time, take time to read through it and really read through those scales. Make yourself some notes of what you want to know about. And that's the thing, and we'll talk, when we talk about the interview itself tomorrow, we're going to talk about prepping this manual. But there's a lot of space. There's a lot of white space in this packet of information. So if this is what is in front of you, then you've got a lot of room to write yourself some notes, write yourself some phrases that you want to remember, highlight a couple things in those diagnostic criteria. If there are sections that you find yourself skipping or forgetting, then highlight it. Some of the diagnostic criteria, the way they're written straight out of the DSM, the impairment and distress can be sort of embedded in all these words. Run a highlighter over it. So you go through your criteria list and then you realize, oh yeah, and down here I got to ask impairment and distress. There's a lot of ways in which this provides a support to you. And the more you do it, the less you find yourself doing that. But to know when you're first starting, make use of the white space, make use of the space to have notes to yourself. And we're going to talk tomorrow about when you're getting ready to do the interview, what is it you want to know? How do you prep for an interview? Because again, if you're doing the life or the A-life, you've done something already. They've already somehow entered your study. Somebody has some kind of data on this person, and you're going to know from your study, where are you going to go to find that information? How are you going to have it in front of you in a way that it will be useful to you in the interview itself? Do you guys have questions? Questions, because we can end early. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk about the medications or something too?
Yeah, Matt was just asking about the medication grids. We can use this a little bit of time. Kobe uses them. Is Wave using a medication grid?
Yes.
You use it, okay. We can do a quick look. Do you have them in your packet? And what you have in your packet is the scannable version for Kobe. And it's funny because I didn't, I was actually going to put this in the PowerPoint, but I had a really hard time getting this thing onto a slide. So I did not. But again, this is something that you're going to fill out after the assessment. And to do this, you need a couple things. You need to have whatever your study is using as your medication codes. There's always a listing of medication codes. And the standard, like we have one, if somebody asks to use the life, a study saying, we want to use the life, can you send out the materials? We'll also include a standard sort of an example list of medication codes that then the study can modify, so pulling off things that's like, yeah, we're not going to see these in our study versus, but we're going to see this, this, and this. And medication code lists get updated as new meds are coming on the market. Basically what it does, it assigns a number per medication or medication group, I guess. And so the medication codes, generally when you have that list, a study will present it in an alphabetical order by your medication and a numeric score, numerical order as well. So that if somebody tells you a new medication, you look it up on the alphabetical list. So you find the medication and you'll see what number is assigned to it. And on your grid, the far left, the column to the farthest left, it says med code, and you have 3 boxes. So that's where you're going to write the number that goes with the name of the medication. So for example, Haldol, on the COBE list, Haldol is 21. So you would put 021. On the COBE list, Lamictal is 112. So 112 goes into the next line. So your medication code is related to the name of the medication they take. And then you want to know what's their dose. And you have 4 boxes. If there is a decimal point, the decimal point gets a box. That's the deal. So if they're taking 0.5, you're going to have 0.5. You're going to use all 4 of those boxes, 0.5. If they're taking 150 trazodone, it is. 150 trazodone. Then you're going to have 0.150 in the dose box. You're going to run that dose until if and when it changes. So you can reflect an increase or a decrease in the medication. Similar to the diagnostic section, when we're talking about symptoms that may fade, sometimes people say, well, I just, they're going to, in the interview, when they're saying to you, yeah, I don't take that anymore. Okay, when did you stop? When's the last time you remember taking it? You also want to know, how did they stop?
They taper.
Did they taper? Was it like, I just don't anymore? It was done. Or did there?
I never restarted.
I forgot, never restarted. You know, when I've done that with medications, I think to myself, oh my God, I'm one of those people on the grid where I'm like, I don't take that anymore. So yes, so we want to know, how did they stop? And how did they start as well? Because what they're taking now may not have been their starting dose. This is what I take. I started this actually in November. Did you start at this dose? Did you start at a lower dose? And how did it increase? You know, was this something that it was a slow increase, and over what period of time? Was it a slow decrease, and over what period of time? Because we want to be able to reflect that on the grid. Also know on this grid, we have the opportunity to use the scoring for PRN. So that's our 888 score. And so when somebody is prescribed a medication to take as needed, and they truly take it as needed, so there's really no particular pattern. Somebody may have a medication prescribed as needed, but they take it every day, coded every day. It's code what they're taking. But if they truly take it as needed, so, oh, I took it 3 times last week. I actually haven't taken it this week. The week before that, I took it twice. Like, it really is on a schedule that it's not going to be possible for them to accurately reflect over a 6-month period of time when they did or didn't take this medication. What we know is there has been the pattern of sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the majority of the time, there's something in their system. It's in their system at some level, so we're going to use the PRN code. Versus somebody who says PRN, it's coded PRN, but, oh, I haven't taken it. I only take that when I fly. And so actually I haven't taken it. So you'll have the medication on the code and 0. 000 in all your boxes. because it's not in their system, so we don't want it to look like it is. If they can
Because this is
clearly
what's
say.
taken versus what's prescribed.
Right. So the PRN code is, we know they're taking it. It varies week to week, but we know they're taking it throughout this period of time. Then that is the code that allows us to see what that looks like. So when you're gathering medication information, you want to know what they were taking last time. Are they still taking it? And at what dose? Has the dose changed at any time?
Has their use changed as well?
Right. It's not just what's prescribed. It's really what are they using? How are they using this? Also, we want to know, did they start to take anything new? And if so, when did that start? How did that start? And so that you then have your time period covered, and those dosages get put in here. I mean, every once in a while, somebody may not know their dose of their medication. So, you know, it's helpful to be able to ask questions like, well, how many do you take? What color are they? Color and shape. If it's a new medication, they're not sure of the dose, because sometimes if you look it up, you may see that it's a med that changes shape or color per dose. So sometimes that's helpful. You know, but if they can't remember, if they're talking to you on the phone and they're home, do you want to go get it? Could you go check? If they're in your office, you always have the opportunity to say, you know what, can I give you a call? I'll give you a call tonight when you're home. Or, you know, we'll just check it that way. It is always amazing to me of how well people report what they take, though. I'm always impressed. Always impressed with people's understanding of what they're taking. But you do have the opportunity, because you are going to code reliability for your MedGrid as well. And the reliability on your MedGrid actually breaks it down. It wants to know your opinion. How reliable are these names of the medication that you just said they're taking? So you want to know are they a good reporter on this or not? How reliable is the dose? And the timing, their start and stop points. You get to actually break it down and look at your reliability of saying, no, I know for sure, you know, the person was really clear that this is the medication they were taking. When they stopped and how they stopped, not so clear. I'm going to drop that to a fair, because, you know, I'm sort of in a month ballpark here. So it allows you to kind of give your opinion a little more clearly on reliability. So, yeah. Do you guys have questions on the MedGrid, or issues that have come up, or ways that you found that are helpful to use?
I was just going to say, you know what we do, especially if people say, maybe they say like, oh, like this week, you know, I didn't take it for 3 days in a row. We do the average, I guess, for the whole week,
Yeah, we do that
whatever the dose is.
Yep.
Okay.
We do that too.
Yeah, like, so if it was 4 days, multiply that by 4 divided by 7.
Right.
Average dose.
So you can do that when it's not really a PRN prescribed medication. They're just sometimes taking it, sometimes not. Yep. So you get as close to the accurate level in their system. Yep.
It's not what they're
Right,
prescribed, it's what they're actually
What
taking.
they're taking.
Yeah,
Yep.
and this is the coding is the average daily dose for that week. So if they only take Ativan once a week when they're having an anxiety attack, then we would, code the average of that dose.
Oh, gotcha.
Do you guys code reliability for the drug class, dose, or timing?
No.
Yeah, we
not
don't.
since at least I've been on COVID. I don't know if they've done it in the past, but we no longer do. They do it though for the WAVE study.
Yeah, I know that Matt and I have, we've both
Yeah.
been here for 5 and like 8 years, and we've never done it.
So I did back in the day, because I've been here since January 2007. Yeah, 11 plus years. So we did in the beginning, and then they found through the analyses that the reliability wasn't really that reliable. So they just kind of stopped
never
coding
mind.
it. Yeah. So circa 2008, you're going to see those scores drop off. And as far as I know, for any analyses, we're not including that in it, because we're obviously not collecting the data anymore, and the data that we had in the beginning was not reliable.
There you go. Because it's an opinion. It really is that, like, yeah.
Yeah, people weren't using the boxes the same way. Some
Oh.
people weren't understanding the question, I think, was part of
Oh, okay, yeah. Yep, you gotta understand the question. You gotta understand the question in the box. Okay. All right, do you guys have any questions at this point?
I don't think so.
Good. All right. What I want to do tomorrow, so tomorrow afternoon, we're going to really just take time to look at the interview itself, of how you're really going to gather this information. So we'll look at how to prep this life booklet. And as I said, Cynthia and I are going to do a role play so you can sort of see and hear how the conversation can go through an interview process. You know, we're not looking to do anything that's diagnostically complicated, Cynthia. Nothing that's complicated, because it really, it just allows you to keep your attention on the process of, you know, walking through.
They keep you on your toes, Claire.
I have no toes anymore. I have no toes. Be like, ooh, you should see a doctor. You should talk to somebody about that.
So Chris visited me.
That's right. And we're done. So that's the plan for tomorrow. Is everybody who's here today going to be here tomorrow?
I think so. 1
Yay.
o'clock tomorrow, right?
1 o'clock tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. All right, then we will call it a day at this point, and we'll be ready to kind of start ourselves tomorrow, and we'll be in good shape. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
So I go to stop.
I didn't. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to mess it up, but okay, now we know for tomorrow.
Yeah, because it's much nicer.
I'll just stop sharing, not stopping me.
What? I guess leave me.
Oh, there it is. Oh, look, you're still
Hi.
there.
You're like full screen now.
Ah.
There you are. Yeah. Note to self for tomorrow.
Okay, so now what did you say? Oh, I go to end meeting. Okay. All right. All right, guys, see you tomorrow.
Bye.
End meeting for all.